Our guest, Dr. Barry Rothman, is currently a much-loved accepted admissions consultant. But before he joined Accepted, he served as San Francisco State University's Health Professions Advisor for 19 years and founded and directed several postbac programs at San Francisco State. He's also taught biology and cellular and molecular neuroscience for 30 plus years. Let's speak again with Dr. Rothman.
Welcome to Admission Straight Talk, the podcast dedicated to graduate admissions and helping you approach the application process thoughtfully and successfully. Your host is Accepted's founder and world-renowned admissions guru, Linda Abraham. At Accepted, our mission is to get you to that unforgettable moment when you read your acceptance email and shout, "Yes, I'm in!" Confident you'll be attending the perfect program to help you launch the career of your dreams.
Welcome to the 376th episode of Admission Straight Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Are you ready to apply to your dream medical schools? Are you competitive at your target programs? Not sure? Accepted's Medical Center can give you a quick and free reality check. Just go to accepted.com/376quiz, complete the quiz, and you'll not only get a free assessment, but tips on how to improve any areas of weaknesses that you might find. Again, use the calculator at accepted.com/376quiz, that's QUIZ, to obtain your free assessment. Our guest today, Dr. Barry Rothman, is the former Health Professions Advisor and Director of San Francisco State University's Pre-Health Professions Certificate Program, which served pre-med, pre-dental, pre-nursing, and other pre-healthcare students who were preparing themselves to apply to their graduate professional schools. Today, he helps Accepted's clients in all aspects of the application process to graduate healthcare programs and graduate schools in the life sciences. Dr. Rothman, welcome to Admission Straight Talk.
Hi, Linda. Good to be here again. I was here 6 years ago. A few things have changed, but it's great to be back, and it's great to have been working with Accepted for the last 5 years.
It's been great having you on staff, and 6 years is way too long of an interval for me to have you on this show. But let's go way back a little bit. Some of this may overlap the interview from 6 years ago, but we're going to quickly get away from that. How did you get involved in pre-health advising at San Francisco State University?
Well, I was being a good tenure track faculty member. I actually had tenure, and I was given the opportunity to be health professions advisor because the previous one had retired. I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought, oh, sure, it'll be an interesting sideline. Little did I know that I would fall in love with it.
Really?
And that within a few years, I would be working with many health profession students, pre-health profession students, and that they would want more service than our school was offering, especially the ones that were postbacs. And with their support and help, and with the support and help of my dean, we created from nothing a postbac program that's been highly successful for the last 14 years.
Wow. And it started out with pre-med postbac, and then it expanded into the other healthcare fields?
Yes, it was always somewhat flexible, but most of the applicants were pre-meds. And then when it was so successful, I realized that it could expand into other areas. So we expanded into a dental postbac program in collaboration with UC San Francisco's School of Dentistry. And then we expanded into a nursing postbac program, which was also very successful and very unusual. There are very few nursing dedicated postbac programs.
In your opinion, who should consider a postbac program?
Well, there's two major types of postbacs. One is called a career changer. And so some people really don't figure out what they want to do career-wise until partway through, or maybe even all the way through undergraduate school. So for those folks, postbac programs, and there's a certain kind for career changers that will take them through all the medical school prerequisites and hopefully a few upper division electives. They basically need all the coursework, or almost all the coursework, that medical schools require. And there's another kind of career changer, which is somebody who actually completed their undergraduate degree, went out into the workforce, and then got the epiphany that they wanted to go into a health profession. Interestingly, many of them are children of physicians.
Really?
Yes, because if you're a child of a physician or a healthcare provider, you want to make sure that you're making this choice on your own, not because mom or dad is in the healthcare. And so sometimes you have to really convince yourself of that by becoming an art history major or a political science major or a public health major, going out into the workforce and then realizing that, inside of myself, I really do want to do this. And I've certainly been exposed to it, but it's not just because of mom or dad.
Right, right. I remember interviewing a certain, by then he was a doctor already, but he'd gone through that. He'd like really fought it. And then he discovered it's what he wanted to do.
Yes.
I also have a cousin who basically went through the same process. But go
Yes,
ahead.
it's an interesting process, and
Yeah.
I think it's very valid. It's really good to make sure it's your decision and not just because you're being influenced. And of course, you have a tremendous advantage because you've seen what the home life is of a physician or a healthcare worker, the good and the bad of it, and you've probably worked in the office during a summer or something like that, and so you really are well informed. You just needed to make sure it was your own decision.
Right.
So those are the career changers, and then the vast majority of people who show up for postbac programs are what we call academic enhancers. So those are people who knew for quite a while that they wanted to go through a health profession school, and they usually majored in biology. That's the most popular major, and it overlaps the most with the medical school requirements. And they just didn't perform as well as they wanted to perform. This is very common, and there's really a huge number of academic enhancers out there. And in the postbac program that I ran, a vast majority of our applications were from academic enhancers. Excuse me.
Sure.
And that's very legitimate. It's, undergraduate school can be a conveyor belt of sorts where you get on as a freshman, get off as a senior or a super senior. And it takes a while to figure out what you want to do and to get it together academically. I know when I look back to my college career, it wasn't stellar during my freshman and sophomore years. And it took me time to mature and to get used to being away from my parents. So I think that's true of a lot of students. And
Sure.
so they're concerned about their academic record. And also many of them are concerned about having enough clinical experience. And they're also concerned about, do they know enough to take the MCAT? So I think postbac programs provide a place, a milieu, where you can hang out with other pre-health students who are equally motivated. And if the program is structured well, it's not going to be super competitive. It'll be super supportive. And it'll be a chance to really, really get to know what you want to get into and get to enhance your academic credentials and to mature scientifically and just emotionally and be ready to apply. And I think that health profession schools love this. They do very well with postbacs. I think postbacs are often exemplary members of their incoming class. And they're, of course, somewhat older, but more mature. And postbacs can provide some parental function within their medical school class or their health professions class because they are older and they have more life experience.
They're also very motivated.
Oh, yes. I'm teaching a class now with 10 postbacs, and they are super motivated. I can't give them enough work. So it's very different than, say, teaching an undergraduate class, which is also extremely satisfying, but it's just a different population with a different level of maturity.
Right. Now, you've kind of outlined the different kinds of postbac programs. There's also formal and informal. Do you want to touch on that?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So what I've been talking about so far, I would call structured postbac programs, or formal postbac programs. And they have the advantage of having somebody looking over the program, and they at times have classes that are strictly for the postbacs. In our program, our classes were dedicated to the postbacs and did not have undergrads in them. So that can be a great advantage. There can be quite a lot of advising. The medical school and other health profession school application process is daunting. It is so complicated. It's like building a nuclear sub or something. And there's so many moving parts. It's really, when I look back on how much information you need to have to navigate this, it's really quite a lot to take on. And so you can get a lot of really expert advising in a structured postbac program, and you can get a lot from your peers. So that's great, but they tend to be a little pricey. Our program at San Francisco State costs $600 a unit. So, and so if you take, 30, 40, 50 units, you're talking, what, $30,000 or something.
Yeah.
So they're pricey, and some of them have financial aid. And the ones that have graduate status have access to financial aid above and beyond your undergraduate financial aid. And so that is an advantage, because graduate loans, federal graduate loans, come out of a different pot of money than your undergraduate. So if you had a lot of undergraduate loans and you used up the amount that you can get as a federal loan, going to a graduate postbac program will open up a whole new pot of money. The problem with these federal loans is that they have very high interest rates.
They also come due.
7-8% in a time when interest rates are almost zero.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So that's the disadvantage there. The advantage of an informal program is that it's extremely flexible. You pick the school, you pick the classes, and you just go as you need. So the tuition tends to be lower, but there's nobody to hold your hand. Many pre-health students are taking classes this way, so you can find some colleagues who are in the same boat that you are, but it's totally unstructured. And one of the things that I've offered to a lot of my clients is to be their advisor in an informal program. Somebody to hold their hand and say, no, don't take that class, take this class. No, don't take a class over at that school, take it at this school. Whatever you do in an informal program is do not take it at a community college if you're going to, let's say, medical or dental school. They really like four-year universities. Now, if you're going to nursing school or a PA school, it's fine to take classes in a community college. But for medical and dental schools and pharmacy schools, it's really much better to take them at a four-year university.
What about extension programs at a
Yes.
four-year university?
Yes, as long as it's associated with a four-year university. So out here in California, we have UC Berkeley Extension, UCLA Extension. Those are both quite good extensions. And many universities have extension. Even San Francisco State has a good extension. So that's the way to go. It definitely saves money, and it's super flexible,
Right.
because you decide when you're going to take a class and which school and how many each semester or quarter, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that you really need advising, and advising hours don't cost that much money.
Not when you're talking about $600 a unit or more.
Right. So if you pay $300 or $330 for an hour advising, that would go a long way. You don't need to have long, endless conversations. Sometimes it's just an email saying, here are the 3 classes I'm thinking about. Which 2 do you think I should take?
Yeah.
So that's a 5-minute email.
Right. No, that clearly is very cost effective. Let's move forward. Okay. So I think we've touched on the postbac and what are the different kinds of postbac programs and some of the factors that applicants should consider in choosing a postbac. Are there any others before we move away from that they should consider? Obviously, cost, location, what actually is offered, and what they need.
I just looked on AMCAS's website recently. They have a postbac website, by the way, and it's really worth looking at because you can filter according to many different criteria. There's now hundreds of postbac programs. They've grown as an industry. So there are many to choose from. I would say most of them are competently run, but just because they are not listed on AMCAS doesn't mean they're not good. And conversely, just because they're listed on AMCAS doesn't mean they're good.
Right.
So you really need to look into them and see what kind of leadership there is, see what people are saying on studentdoctor.net, which is somewhat gossipy, but still try to find out from word of mouth and from other people on the internet, what do people think about the program? And feel free to ask the directors. Many of the directors are actually quite available and willing to talk to you. Another thing to look for is, do they have a linkage program with a health profession school, like a medical school? Our program.
I would assume it also makes sense to ask how many graduates actually go to medical school or dental school or whatever the school is supposed to be preparing you for.
Right. What's their success rate, essentially? Yeah. Yes. And many postbac programs have very high success rates because they're already selecting for people who are highly motivated and think they have a chance to get in. So our success rate was around 80% all around.
That's fantastic.
So,
that's
yeah,
wonderful.
It's twice the national average of getting into medical school.
That's right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, we are in the middle of the 2021 medical application cycle. MCAS has started processing applications. However, this cycle is unlike any other cycle, thanks to COVID. Now, that situation has presented several challenges to applicants. No MCAT in March, April, or May, and only at the very end of June for June. Cancellation of volunteer and paid clinical positions. Pass, fail instead of grades for classes that perhaps you wanted to be graded or thought would be important to be graded in the spring semester, and perhaps even going forward. And then uncertainty about the kind of medical education you're actually going to get if you start medical school, certainly in 2020, but perhaps even in 2021. Is it going to be online, offline? Are you going to get the clinical experience? It's so important. How do you think med schools are going to respond to the fact that many applicants couldn't take the exam? Let's just take one of the factors, the first factor I listed, couldn't take the exam when they planned to take it, and of necessity are going to have to apply later in the cycle, or applying with a score that they're not satisfied with because they thought they were going to retake it. So those are two different scenarios.
Or apply without a score.
Right.
Yes. It's really unknown. We don't know what med schools are going to do, and my best guess is each school will have a different way to deal with this. And so it really raises the level of uncertainty.
Oh, yeah.
And so it could be to your advantage. Let's say you have a okay but not stellar MCAT score. Maybe some of the schools aren't going to even look at them. So,
right.
so
Stanford is not.
Yeah.
Stanford's very clear that it's not.
Right. So, if you've got everything locked up and you really have a great research record and you have a great clinical record, these are things that Stanford looks for, and you're not so happy with your MCAT, okay, apply to Stanford and see what happens. Do they really ignore your MCAT? If you take it, it gets reported. I guess if you report it, it will be reported. But so some schools will just ignore the MCAT, and some schools might be very forgiving of lack of certain kinds of clinical experience because of COVID-19. And some schools might be forgiving of pass, no pass versus a letter grade, if your school forces you to do it. At SF State, we did not force our students to do it. We just made it an option. And our students knew quite well that it was to their advantage to get a letter grade and not a pass, no pass. So I think it's a very uncertain scenario in terms of the application process. I think it's worth applying. I think in some cases, your chances are better. Yeah. And it's worth going for it. In terms of what you're going to find as a medical student, that's also going to be really up in the air.
Yeah.
And as our country goes through its ups and downs of spikes in COVID-19 infections and then easing up and then spikes, all of it dependent on social behavior. Oh my God, who knows? Who knows? But we need doctors. We really need doctors, and no medical school is going to shut down. They need to get people in there, and they're going to be clever about how they give them clinical experience. My guess is they're going to have some in-person clinical experience, and it's going to have to be with some very careful personal protection, and maybe really good ventilation and, positive pressure rooms and all sorts of stuff that will lower the chance of getting infected. But there's risks involved. I mean, when you have contact with so many people who are ill and maybe a lot who have COVID, your chances of getting COVID go up. And lots of healthcare professionals have gotten COVID. So I guess if you're thinking about going into med school, you should also think, well, am I willing to accept those risks?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely true. It's just a very uncertain time. I mean, for everybody in every field. And I guess medical students or pre-meds are kind of on the front line of that.
Yes. And
Yeah.
we need doctors. We really
Right.
need doctors. We need healthcare professionals. We need nurses. We need PAs. We need them all even more.
Right. I was talking with an applicant recently. The applicant had submitted his primary application and was wondering whether it made sense to submit the secondaries, because obviously the cost is much higher when you start with secondaries. And both the application fees, and they were wondering whether it made sense to invest in our services. And the thing with this particular applicant was not only that, well, he had not taken yet the MCAT at all. So they didn't have any score. And the practice exams were not going that well. So there were two aspects. One, the MCAT wasn't going to happen until the end of August. And he was already preparing his secondaries, but wasn't sure if he should really pull the trigger and invest in those secondaries, given that he wasn't going to have the MCAT till wasn't even going to take the exam till the end of August, and the outcome was so uncertain. So it was really a tough call. How would you have advised that person?
Well, I'd find out how risk averse they were.
That's part of the question. Yeah, of course.
I mean, my own personality would be, yeah, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And see what happens. But I think you actually have a better chance of getting in. But some people, that would drive them up the wall, and they would be so anxious about the process that it would not be enjoyable. Applying to health profession school is already anxiety provoking.
Oh, yes.
And, it's a rite of passage, and every rite of passage in your life is attended by a lot of self-criticism and anxiety. And then to add the uncertainty of COVID amps up the anxiety even more. So it's good to work on your yoga and your meditation practice while you're going through this process.
Right.
You're going to enter a career that's actually quite stressful. Why not start working on it now? Your ability to handle stress and manage it. So I think as long as you're not too risk aversive, I'd go for it.
Okay. What do you recommend applicants do if they can't do the community service or the clinical volunteer work that they had planned to do prior to March? Okay, so this all basically started in March. It's now mid-July. The show will probably air in August, and it doesn't look like anything's going to open up prior to August. What suggestions do you have for pre-meds?
Well, some places are letting people work. I mean,
Okay.
you might be considered essential personnel if you're a scribe or you're helping.
True.
Medical assistant, et cetera. Again, you're having risks because you're being exposed to patient population. So I think there will be some available positions. There's also being clever about using the online capabilities. So there are online scribing services. So no infection
No,
No
nothing
infection
possible
problem there,
Right,
except maybe
right.
your computer getting infected.
A
But,
virus.
but no personal infection risk there. And also think about clever things you can do that are part of helping people. There's a lot of lonely people who are shut in who are all by themselves during this pandemic. They need young people to talk to. And maybe you could go grocery shopping for somebody. Or one of my clients set up a whole website that dealt with people in her community who were suffering from COVID and provided services for them. So I think you're limited by your imagination, and there's a lot of clever things you can do. And schools are asking, what did you do during the COVID pandemic? And you don't want to say, well, gee, I got a lot of television in and got a lot of sleep
Netflix.
in. My Netflix, I used it well. So you don't want to just say that. You really want to think about ways you can use your time and your energies and your skills to help other people. I mean, in COVID, we're all in this together. And in many ways, it's pulling people together who've never really worked together. And so that's a silver lining to this terrible cloud. But I think that's the way to go.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago that in some respects you think 2021, or actually it'll be the 2020-2021 application cycle, is actually a good time to apply.
Mm-hmm.
I'm inclined to agree with you, but why do you say that?
Well, again, there's so much uncertainty. Who knows what's going to happen? Again, as long as you're not risk aversive, go for it. See what happens. And if you have an application that maybe has some glitches in it, this may be a chance to have them overlooked. So that's why I think it's really a good opportunity.
Yeah, my thinking is similar. I'm sure there are going to be some people who decide not to apply now because of the uncertainty, or because they can't get their test taken, or because they finally do take it in July or August or September and they don't get the score they want. And so they're not going to apply now. And they will apply the following cycle, along with all the people that normally would apply the following cycle. So I think that statistically, there's just going to be a slightly smaller applicant pool this year.
Yes, that wouldn't surprise me at all, is that the applications will be down.
Yeah.
I guess we'll wait and see. I don't have any numbers right now.
I don't either, but that's my take, and that will statistically make it somewhat easier. I don't know whether it'll be 5% or 10% or whatever. My crystal ball is very cloudy, but that should make it somewhat easier to get in.
Yes. If there's 20% fewer applicants, then
that would make a big
getting
difference.
In
that would make a big difference. I was even thinking 5 or 10%. There'll be some easing up of competition.
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised.
Now, we've been focusing very much on MD programs, but what about MD PhD programs? Is your advice in terms of applying different for them in light of COVID, or do you say, again, it's a great time to apply?
Well, I think having the research component to the MD PhD adds complexity to the application. MD PhD programs really want you to be competent in research. And if I were an MD PhD program, I would not accept somebody who hasn't proven themselves in the research world. And that means working in a lab. And if your lab shut down, then it's hard to work in a lab. So that can be a problem. And so I think with MD PhD applications, you really need to have good documentation of your research. Of course, what really works is to have publications. And by publications, I mean, sure, journal articles in peer-reviewed journals, that's great. Book chapters, that's great. But even a poster at a national meeting or a local meeting can help. But the more you can document your research capability, and the better you write it up in your MD PhD application, which has quite a robust research essay, up to 10,000 characters. You should be able to show that you know what you're talking about, that you weren't just a pair of hands in a lab, but you actually brought your brain along with you, and that you know what's going on, you understand the problem, you understand why it's important, and you can talk about it in a way that shows that you have a grasp of it. So if If you're not there, then I would not apply this cycle. I would wait and try to get more experience.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now we've been kind of talking about, we talked about COVID, we talked about MD, PhD. Let's turn back to med school admissions in general. One thing that comes up a lot is the value or wisdom of gap years. How do you feel about that? And now again, I'm talking in general.
I love gap years.
Okay.
And I advise my students, the fastest way to medical school is slowly. So there's, you know, a lot of people rush this process, and so they apply without having all the I's dotted and T's crossed. And if you have to take an extra gap year to do that, because your undergrad years were so busy, you really didn't have a chance to attend to all of that, fantastic. Right. It's a chance to go out in the world, get off the undergrad conveyor belt, and really go out into the world and see what's going on, get experience, get more clinical experience, take some upper division bioelectives, and just enhance your record. Most of the people that I work with are in their early 20s, or the postbacs in their mid 20s or late 20s. You're still young enough that that extra year isn't going to detract from your life. And I know there's a lot of urgency to get into medical school, sometimes from parents or from the community. And that's worth resisting if you can really have a good application. It's much better to have a super strong application, your best application you can have, and wait an extra year than to apply, maybe get in, but maybe not as good of a school as you could have gotten into, or maybe not get in, and then you have to apply the next year anyhow.
Right.
So I'm all for taking advantage of the time after graduation, even 2 years, waiting until you get into a health profession school, or even longer if you want to pursue something, some project or something that you really feel strongly about, that's fine.
It's not going to take away from your medical knowledge.
No.
I was talking with, this is probably about a year ago, maybe even more at this point, with Jennifer Welch. She's a dean of admissions at SUNY Upstate Medical School. You know, very experienced. I think she's been doing this for 20, 30 years. And she said that she doesn't like to think of gap years as gap years. She likes to think of them as growth years. And I really like that. It's not like, unless you sit in front of the television set for the whole year, it should be a year of tremendous growth, right? Either you're going to be out in the working world, or you're going to be traveling, or you're going to be doing some medical mission, or you're going to be experiencing another field entirely, which will convince you that that's not the field for you and medicine is the right one for you. All that's extremely valuable, and it is growth, and it enhances the applicant's profile for medical school admissions.
Yes, schools really like to see you doing something they really care about for an extended period of time. I've had students come to me and say, I have this great opportunity to go to some other country and be involved in this fantastic project. Should I do that or apply to medical school? And I said, yeah, do that. This sounds great.
Right.
And apply to medical school next year.
Right, for sure. Now, we're in the heart of secondary season, okay?
Oh, yeah.
They're coming in, right? They're flooding in, pouring in. What's your advice to applicants in terms of responding to secondary applications?
You really have to be organized. Oh, God, you have to be organized. One thing I do for my clients is I have a spreadsheet that I created that has the 15 or 16 most common topics in secondaries. So 16 rows of topics, and then columns for each school you're applying to. And in the cells, you can put the size of the essay, 500 words, 250 characters, 1 page, or not specified. And so you can track all of your different essays, because what happens is they start to get kind of repetitive. I guarantee you that every school will ask you about diversity. So you should think about how you respond to that. But there's going to be a lot of topics that are common among the different secondaries. So it would be really good to track that and try to remember, like, oh yeah, what school asked me this question? Oh, I can go to my spreadsheet and see which one, and then maybe I can use that answer as a foundation for the next answer. The other thing to track for sure is the due dates. And you can move the columns around so that they're in order of due date so that you stay on track. I mean, taking on secondaries, especially if you apply to a lot of schools, which I recommend.
How many do you recommend?
40.
Whoa.
I recommend 40 medical MD schools.
Mm-hmm. What if you're applying DO?
Well, they're not 40 DO schools.
Right.
So maybe 15 or 20 DO schools.
Okay.
I recommend that because in some ways it's a numbers game. And the more schools you apply to, the more of a chance you're going to get interviews. That's what you're aiming for. That's the strategy. And the more interviews you get, the more chance you have of an admission. So it's just so difficult to get into a medical school. If you think about it, most schools get 5,000 applications. I mean, I can't imagine how to handle 5,000 applications. My postbac program had less than 1,000 a year, and we were overwhelmed. So 5,000, I can't imagine that they sit and read every one of them. And so some of them are going to get filtered out, and they may lose people who are really good. Some of them may be sent to students, medical students, who might pick through them and find some gems. We just don't know. So you really increase your odds of getting an interview by applying to a lot of schools. And you just don't know which school will be the magic school that says, oh yeah, you're the guy that, you know, went to Amsterdam and did some social service. And yeah, my aunt lives in Amsterdam. So yeah, I'm interested. You just don't know what's going to attract you to what's going to make you attractive to that school. So that's why you just have to play the long game, so to speak, and apply to a large number of schools.
Okay.
Now, so secondaries are going to be just a huge burden with 40 schools.
Yeah.
It's going to take over your life. And so you need to have a balanced life, and you need to explain to your friends why you're getting a little wacky during this period. And you need to methodically go through it. The good thing is that because there's a lot of overlap among the secondary questions, you can use earlier essays to help you with the later ones. And I mean, we help our students a lot, our clients a lot with secondaries. We're really good at it. And after we've helped with maybe 5 schools or so, a lot of our clients can move on and do most of the work themselves and just ask us to proofread.
Right. And when you have your spreadsheet, and do you find it easier, or do you recommend that clients start with the longer essays and then cut for shorter, similar questions, or go the other way?
Well, I think you should do one school at a time entirely.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But let's say you have your spreadsheet and you have choices. Okay. No, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would just look, are you talking about within a school or?
No, I'm talking about, let's say you have 3 or 4 school applications that you want to do.
Oh, and they're due at the same time.
Yeah, and they're due the same time. And I completely agree that you do one school at a time, but
right.
You're looking at your spreadsheet. Now, which do I start with? The ones that have the longer essays or the one that have the shorter essays? And there's kind of 2 different psychologies.
Exactly. I think it really depends on your style. I would do the shorter ones first, but maybe somebody else would like to do the longer ones first. And the advantage of that is it's easier to edit down than edit up.
Exactly.
So if you have a longer essay, you can cut it down for the shorter ones.
That's right. And the advantage of knocking off the short ones first is you can say, done. You have that kind of psychological, exactly, boost.
All right,
one's out. I got one down. I'll go to the next one.
I'll tell you, the first one's the hardest.
Really? Yeah, makes sense. Sure.
You know, the other thing is you can look up the secondaries from previous cycles or some of them from this cycle. You can get going on them before you get them.
Right. Absolutely. And that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah.
Let's move on to interview prep. You, I
Oh,
know,
yeah.
are great at interview prep. What are some of your top tips in terms of getting ready for an interview?
Practice, practice, practice. Few of us are born with an interview gene so that we're good at this. I got good at interviewing and talking because I had to teach for 30 some years. And so teaching is a great way to practice interviewing. But for most people, you really don't have a lot of experience with interviews, and you really need to practice. And that means just sitting down with somebody who knows how to help you and practice first standard interviews. Sit down, one-on-one or one-on-two, something like that, and go through many of the standard questions. Why do you want to be a physician? What are your good and bad qualities? What's an obstacle you've had to overcome? These are very standard interview questions, but a lot of people really stumble over them if they haven't thought about it.
Right.
Can you imagine somebody saying to the question, why do you want to be a physician, saying, oh, that's a good idea. Let me think about that. So you want to be prepared, but
Right.
also you don't want to be over-rehearsed. You don't want to sound robotic. So you have to find a way that each time you answer the question, it's a little different. And that what I suggest is having a list of what I call bullet points in your mind that you want to pick from in terms of answering questions. So practice, practice, practice. And that's just for the standard interview. For MMIs, multiple mini interviews, you really need to practice some of the scenarios. In our postbac program, when I was running it, we had a colloquium in which we practiced MMIs. And I have to say it was entertaining. We had fun doing it. And our students really gained from being asked bizarre questions and having interesting scenarios that are similar to what happens in MMIs. So you really need to spend a lot of time on this. And it's a shame if people don't do well after going through this whole very expensive process
Right.
and not prepare well for interviews. And a lot of people crash and burn at the interview stage, and it's not the time to be a rugged individualist. It's time to really make sure you've got a support system and you have people who are knowledgeable who can help you with interviews.
Right. It's basically, it's a dress rehearsal. Have a dress rehearsal before you go on stage.
Yes, and now the interviews are through AMCAS's Vita program, which is, I guess, like Zoom. You can practice on Zoom.
Right. Well, the Vita, isn't that a video? And where they have to, they're not even talking to a person. That's not even an interview. It's I think a question posed, and they have to respond to the question.
Uh-huh.
So
I haven't looked into it. I'm not sure what it is. I
Okay.
was guessing it would be like a Zoom interview, but maybe it's different than that.
I think it is a little bit different, but
Uh-huh.
we're
And
all gonna
then,
have to learn about that one.
Casper is also very popular these days.
Yes.
Casper is like an online MMI in some ways, where you're given scenarios and you have to type in answers as to what you would do. And again, it's good to do practice and not just assume, oh yeah, I know this stuff, no problem.
Right. Right. So we're going to wind up the interview in just a couple of minutes, but any last words of advice?
Do not rush this process.
Good.
Most of you are young and you have time that you can spend on it to really get it down. So do not rush this process. That's one big thing. The other is lead a balanced life. You're not going to do yourself any good if you're just going nuts and having panic attacks in the middle of doing this. And it's much better to find ways that you can do things in a balanced way, because that's a career you're entering and you want to be balanced in that, or it's going to really affect your health.
Right. And what do you wish I would have asked you in this interview?
About my granddaughters. No, kidding. No, I don't. I think it was a very thorough interview, and I really, really have enjoyed it. I really didn't. I'm not thinking of anything that's been missing here.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Dr. Rothman, thank you so much for joining me today. And listener, if you would like to learn more about Dr. Barry Rothman or take advantage of his expertise in medical and grad school admissions, we're going to include links to his bio and contact me page in the show notes at accepted.com/376. Listener, thank you too for joining Dr. Barry Rothman and me for our 376th episode. If you find the show worthwhile, I have a suggestion. Subscribe. That way you won't miss any future shows, whether with admissions directors, writing experts, testback pros, fantastic admissions consultants, or alumni doing great things. You can find subscribe links in the show notes at, you guessed it, accepted.com/376. Quick reminder, don't miss the med school admissions quiz. Find out if you are really ready to apply and competitive at your target schools. Take the quiz at accepted.com/376quiz today. And today is not part of the URL. Thanks again for coming. This is Admission Straight Talk produced by Accepted, and I am your host, Linda Abraham. I'll talk to you again next week.